right, welcome. Well, thanks everybody for being here. We are going to actually kick things off with a little bit of a kind of a pop quiz, a way to get some context for you and to see what you already know about some of the things we're going to be sharing today. Don't worry, it's all anonymous. You don't have to put in your name or anything, but just a great chance for us to get a sense for what you already know and where we maybe have some new information to share. So I'll drop a link in the chat and then we'll share my screen so you can see some live results populating. And then we'll do introductions after that. So you'll have a chance to get to know us and what we're all about for our session. Thanks again for being here. And anyone from TechTalent, was there any other intro that you wanted to give?
You've got it, Andrea. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, great. Here comes the link in the chat and I'll share my screen here. All right, coming up here, great. I'm just gonna hit present here. All right, so our first question, as you are heading over to that poll, is a question related to which state has the greatest access to high school computer science courses. And I see some answers already populating here. So we had Arkansas, California, Indiana, Minnesota, or Utah as some of our possibilities here, possible answers. And seeing some answers come in. And I should have mentioned, this is sort of like a lightning round quiz. I'm just gonna give maybe 30 seconds tops. So just go with your gut. Like I said, it's all anonymous, so no pressure. If you think, oh, I didn't quite get that one, that's okay. We'll help cover some of this information as we are learning today. So it looks like we've got a consensus here, Arkansas, and that is the right answer. Arkansas does have the greatest access to high school computer science courses as of 2021, and it's actually tied with South Carolina, but we have some more to share about what Arkansas is doing, and so wanted to kind of point them out as a leader here. All right, so I see nobody put Minnesota down here, and so I'm going to flip to our next question and see what folks have to say about this. This question is, which state, I already see some answers coming in, has the least access to high school computer science courses? So when you're thinking about, you know, where there's some growth to happen, what do you think? And again, just go with your gut here. No pressure if you're not sure. About 3 more seconds to answer. All right, we've definitely got a consensus here. So the title of our session is Computer Science Ed, how do we help get Minnesota out of last place? So it was maybe a little bit of a giveaway there, but yes, Minnesota is in 50th place in the United States in terms of access to computer science courses at the high school level. And we'll talk more about kind of how that shakes out and what that means for us and what we want to do about it in our session today. So let's dig just a little bit deeper into pointing out where we definitely have some areas of growth to work on. So thinking about our IT workforce in Minnesota, and maybe Aaron and Katie shared some stats about this morning. Which percent of our IT workforce in Minnesota identify as females? What do you think? So we've got 61%, 26%, or 12%. And again, just kind of go with your gut. What do you think? All right, we've got a pretty good consensus there. That's right, it is 26% of our Minnesota IT workforce is made up of females. And if we look at intersectional data, so if we break it down even further, a very small percent, it's about 4.6% of our Minnesota IT workforce identify as females of color. So we definitely have a lot of work to do to be more inclusive in our IT spaces in industry. And let's take a look at how that translates into our education space, because I think a main theme of our session today is that there are a lot of connection points, a lot of areas where industry and education see similar challenges and maybe can also work together to see similar growth and similar successes. So, all right, here's the next question. We're just about finishing up here. So this is a longer question, but thinking about those advanced placement computer science exams, which are kind of the highest level computer science exams that students can take, and then they receive college credit for high scores. So who of the high schoolers who took those exams in 2020 identify as Hispanic, Latinx, Black or African American, Native American, Alaskan, or Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. So we've got quite a consensus here. It looks like already coming out of the gate. And that's right, 11% of our students who took that advanced placement computer science, one of the exams, identified as one of the populations here. So just thinking about, again, how in industry and education, we're seeing similar patterns. And again, probably really identifying the need to work together. All right, and I've got 2 more questions here. So this one, what's the number of teachers who have graduated from a Minnesota teacher prep program with a computer science teaching license? Any guesses there? And again, no stress, it's anonymous. So if you're wrong, that's okay. But just getting kind of a sense for where you think we're at with graduating some teachers with a computer science teaching license. All right, so it looks like we've got a close call here. We've got some fluctuating numbers there. So 0 is actually the correct answer. And we'll share definitely more details about this in our presentation here today. But Minnesota does not actually have a designated computer science teaching license. And so when we're thinking about how do we expand opportunities, how do we create more hands-on computer science learning for students, preparing teachers is definitely a challenge that we're facing. And there are some ways that we're finding around that that we'll share, but keep that in mind when we're thinking about some of the statewide infrastructure that's either kind of creating a barrier or helping us. And in this case, it's definitely a challenge. All right, last one. This is an important one, I think, for a lot of reasons. What % of Minnesotans who were born in Minnesota stay here? This is according to a Star Tribune poll that came out. So we got some folks in the higher numbers there, thinking about your own circles and networks. Who do you know that was born here and is still here? Looks like we've got some consensus arriving there. Hey, congratulations. That's right, 68% of Minnesotans who were born here stay here. And so just thinking about some of the things that were shared here earlier this morning, homegrown talent really is a big deal. And not to say by any means that every student should become, an IT professional, but just thinking about the well-rounded skills and skill development that having exposure to computer science creates for our students and possibilities for their future. Definitely, in my opinion, worth really thinking about how we can broaden participation in some of our computer science opportunities and create more widespread opportunities for kids. So thanks again for engaging in that little pop quiz. You did great. Way to go, way to shine a little bit with some prior knowledge. And now we're going to jump right in to our agenda and some introductions. You know who we are and why we're so passionate about these topics. So we're going to dive in just a little bit to some kind of landscape information, what's happening around computer science education across the nation for context, and then here in Minnesota. We've got some policy updates that we want to share with you, as well as thinking about some of those ways that industry and education really could partner and create some awesome opportunities that go beyond what either of us can
Andrea,
offer
are
by
you
ourselves.
muted?
I don't think so. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yep,
Okay, awesome.
I'm here.
Let me know, keep me posted. And then we'll think about some ways that we can all take action and definitely open it up for some questions and discussion after that. All right, well, I've been talking for a little bit. Thanks for letting me kick things off. My name is Andrea Vazquez, and I'm the Director of Educator Training and School Partnerships with Minnesota-based nonprofit called Code Savvy, where we are working to expand equitable and engaging computer science education through youth programming and also through educator training. I'm a teacher by trade for 12 years, and this is kind of my first year outside of working in schools to work a little more full-time with Code Savvy. But I'm here with a dual hat on because I'm also on the steering committee along with 7 other folks for a really important group called CSforAll Minnesota. And what we're doing is we are a part of a national alliance for expanding computing education pathways. So it's an alliance that's made up of 23 states and we are looking at ways to broaden participation in computing. Minnesota was one of the last wave of states to join, and so we definitely have other states to look to who are making really important progress and a lot of headway with computer science education and kind of sustainable pathways in their states. Some of the work that we've done so far include working towards writing a landscape report in terms of what's happening around computer science education in Minnesota. In the future, you'll see that we'll be convening a summit to help hopefully draft a state plan and some timeline around ways to increase access to K through 16 computer science ed in Minnesota. We're also really looking for those partnerships, ways that we can support and create partnerships that help drive some state level sustainability for computer science ed. I'm going to pass it over now to some of my really talented and important co-presenters here to let them share a little bit about who they are and why they're so passionate about CS Ed. So I'm going to pass it to Amy next.
Great, thanks, Andrea, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our session today. Really appreciate your time. I'm Amy Roberts. I'm a Senior Director of State Government Affairs for Code.org. And Code.org is a national nonprofit that is dedicated to expanding access to and increasing participation by females and underrepresented racial and ethnic groups in computer science K-12 education. Our vision is really that every student in every school should have an opportunity to take computer science. I myself am actually a native Minnesotan. I live here, I am from here, and I spent a number of years working at the Minnesota Department of Education and the Minnesota Capitol. So I have a little bit of background in public policy and government affairs. But I am a former prosecutor, which is in Dakota County, which is kind of what led me down the education policy path in the I was prosecuting felony level offenses. And at that point, it's really hard to reset a path. And so education really is where we can have the greatest impact on kids' futures. So that sort of drove me to the education policy side of life, and that's where I continue to work. So thank you again. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Thanks, Amy. We're so glad you're here and excited to be partnering with you in a lot of ways in the work that you're doing. So thanks again. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Katie to introduce herself now. And I think, many of you will have seen her already. So thanks, Katie, for the sharing you've already done and for being willing to be a part of our session here today as well.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here, and thank you. And thank you all I have seen some people starting to put in the chat their name and where they are joining us from. Please keep doing that. That's very helpful for context of who's all with us today. But once again, I'm Katie McClelland. I am the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Minnesota Technology Association. And previous to this role, I led the workforce policy portfolio for the Committee on Education and Labor in the U.S. House of Representatives. So looking at, that covers kind of a wide spectrum of things, but really focused on how do we help people get into pathways like IT. And also some of my background was leading the recent reauthorization of the Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, which had a big focus on trying to get employers more engaged in the education system too. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that later, but I am also a Minnesota native. I grew up in South Minneapolis and happy to have this role bringing me back to Minnesota.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie, so much. We're so glad to be welcoming you back to Minnesota from your roles that have taken you in other places of the nation. And, just again, really excited to be partnering with you and welcoming you as a part of this session. Just a quick question for the audience here. If you have your Zoom controls and want to do a quick show of hands. So Amy, Katie, and I didn't mention this, but I'm also a Minnesota native. I grew up in Maple Grove, went to the Osseo School District. Just curious, show of hands, how many of you all are Minnesota natives as well? So going back to kind of our stat, about 68% of folks who were born here stay here. Just kind of curious. Okay. Cool, just a cool data point, and could be a fun way to open meetings too with some of those fun stats. All right, well, thanks again for engaging. The chat is definitely open. We love your engagement, and welcome folks from across the border. Renee, I see your comment there. Yeah, awesome. All right, so let's get started with just a common definition. There's been a lot of reference to computer science education here today, and we just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're referring to, especially when we're thinking about computer science education for some younger students. It's sometimes a little harder to understand what that might be without parsing out a little bit of the definition. So when we think about computer science in general, we're kind of talking about the academic discipline. So it's, the study of computers. We're talking about algorithms and algorithmic processes. We're talking about kind of what makes them what they are, their principles, as well as kind of how they show up through hardware and software designs, how they're implemented, and kind of that user design experience. And then the impact on society, which I think is like my favorite part to discuss with students, is like, how does this impact the world around us? And even kindergartners, even our youngest students, can really engage with those topics. We also talk a little bit about, and you might hear us throw out some terminology around computational thinking, which is a really helpful mindset, problem-solving mindset, and skills that help us not only in computer science, but really in any field, to think about how to approach a problem in a systematic way. And then lastly, coding is really that technical skill or programming that helps us to communicate with the computer or with the device to tell it what we want it to do. So that's a little bit of some common terminology. And now we're going to launch into a little bit of our context building. So thinking about Minnesota, we already know that we are in last place in terms of access to computer science at the high school level, but where are some other states? How does the national landscape of computer science look, and how are we situated within that in some other ways as well? So I'm going to pass it over to Amy now, and Amy, you can let me know if I'm lagging behind a little bit on slides, and I'll try to keep up.
Sounds good. You can just pop right to the next one here. So along with the Code.org Advocacy Coalition, we developed 9 public policies, or 9 policy recommendations that make computer science fundamental to a state's education system. All 9 policies promote equitable access to foundational CS courses. So in the last, basically since we began our work about 6-7 years ago, over almost 300 policies, 283, or almost 300 policies, 283 policies have been enacted nationwide of the 9 recommended policies. Last year alone, 31 states adopted 50 computer science policies. And last year, in addition to the policy adoption, we reached a big milestone. One of our 9 policies is a recommendation that computer science count toward some type of graduation requirement. In Minnesota, it allows this to happen as a 4th math credit. So all 50 states now, plus DC, fulfilled this policy. So that was a big milestone that one of the 9 actually reached every state in the nation. 3 states now have a graduation requirement for computer science: Arkansas, Nevada, and South Carolina. 6 states have adopted all 9 of the policies. And last year, over $65 million was allocated, and that is state funding. So there's a number of different sources of funding that local districts or states can tap into, from federal funds to NSF grants and, et cetera. There are all sorts of different sources, but with this number is specific to like a state legislature allocating state budget dollars toward computer science. And right now, 23 states across the nation require all of their high schools to offer computer science. So it's important to keep in mind that offering computer science is not a requirement to take computer science. It is a make it available to all of your students requirements. As I alluded to, Minnesota has 2 of these policies, 2 of the 9 in place. CS can count as a math credit. And we also have wonderful leadership at the Minnesota Department of Education. And I believe Sarah is with us today. So we're fortunate to have that state level leadership, because that, as we continue to build and move forward, having the Department of Education be a partner in this is essential to any level of success that we could ever see statewide. We know from our research over the past few years that adoption of computer science policies is correlated with a greater percentage of high schools offering computer science. And that's why we put such emphasis on public policy and trying to pursue these state level changes. And as we've highlighted a number of times, despite the fact that Minnesota averages on a monthly basis over 14,000 jobs, with an average salary of over 90,000, we're, as we've said many times now, in last place. It's also important to note, and many of you probably know this too, a lot of the computing jobs are outside of tech centers. So it's people sometimes make the mistake of thinking about computer science as just some kind of tech related tech piece, but it covers it's in every industry in every state. So that's what makes the K-12 piece so critical for students. And like we said, number of times we are in last. And I think that was, as somebody who is a product of our schools, as many of you are as well, it was very surprising to see and learn that. And so that definitely lit a little fire in my belly when I came on board with code.org. So how do we look regionally? Then when we look in the upper Midwest, in the upper Midwest, Iowa is definitely leading the pack from our 5-state region. And so regionally, when we at first glance, it doesn't look like, it's kind of, we're maybe kind of on par with what's happening in the Midwest. But let's take a peek at another region and compare. This is in the Southeast, and you can see the chart looks very, very different. Mississippi right now is currently phasing in its requirement, not just for high schools to offer computer science, but a requirement that all K-12 offer computer science. And they are working, they're currently building out their teacher capacity, and they have a phase in requirement over the next 3 years to get to 100% of their schools offering computer science. As we alluded to, Arkansas is considered very much a leader in this space from the K-12 perspective. They are at 92% of their high schools offering computer science as of right now, and their graduation requirement was passed last session and it is being phased in with their freshman class this year. So we anticipate, we're going to see even more growth with that number. But just to give you a little context about Arkansas' story, they began their computer science push with a very concerted effort. Their governor led the way, Governor Hutchinson, in 2015. They started with a requirement for all their high schools to offer computer science, and then they expanded that for K through 8. In 2015, Arkansas had about 1,100 students enrolled in computer science. Today, they have over 13,000. That is a 770% increase. That includes a 1,300% increase in female students and an over 700% increase for underrepresented groups. In 2015, Arkansas had under 20 teachers teaching computer science. Today, they are over 600. And just as another touch point for what's happening around the country, Tennessee right now, their legislature is currently debating adding a computer science graduation requirement. And it has passed a couple of committees. It's making its way through the process. Like any legislative season, we don't know exactly how that will play out, but it's looking promising right now. So that kind of gives a little bit of the landscape. Andrea, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Amy. That's so helpful to have that context and to see a region that is excelling, is really doing a lot to expand access to computer science ed, and hear a little bit about their story. So thanks so much for providing that information for us, and we'll be excited to come back and hear from you again in just a little bit. All right, so I'm going to help provide just a little bit of a deep dive into some of our state data. And as I mentioned, I'm wearing kind of two hats today. So my code savvy nonprofit role as kind of a professional development provider and an educator around computer science ed, but also as a steering committee member for CS4All Minnesota. And some of the work that CS4All Minnesota has been doing is really to gather information from a variety of stakeholder groups and from a variety of sources and data access points to understand what really is the landscape of computer science education in Minnesota. So just think about kind of some of these topics that are described on the right-hand side here. So starting with a definition of computer science ed, it's surprisingly complex, the way that different schools categorize computer science ed or technology in general. So we wanted to have kind of a common idea there, and then ranging through to talking about access to AP Computer Science, that's that advanced placement coursework and exams, thinking about teacher licensure, teacher education, so our newer teachers or teachers who are going through teacher prep programs now, what's available to them, and then what's available for teachers who are already in the teaching field and want to gain more kind of information and capacity in computer science ed. So for more information, please feel free to hop into any of those briefs. They're a great way to just get a real, I guess, summarized view of important talking points and great to share as well. So shout out to the CS4All Minnesota steering team and all the work on those. So as I'm sharing a little bit about Minnesota specific data, I just want to share a little bit of a tool that we use called the CAPE framework that helps us to identify some sustainable ways to create equitable computer science systems. And so we're looking at starting at the bottom of the pyramid here, what policies and resources are available to help build capacity for computer science education. So again, thinking about our educators there and some of the resources available to them, looking then at who has an opportunity to access computer science education. And then once you have access, who's participating, who's enrolling in those courses, and then what's the experience? What does it look like? What does it feel like for those students who are taking those classes? So I'm just going to be pretty brief about each of these points and sharing a little bit of data, but please know that there's more information available. So if any of these areas especially interest you, feel free to reach out to me or anyone from CS4All Minnesota for more information. So when we think about capacity building, we're not just focused only on the people, because we know that our teachers are really important, but there are also infrastructure pieces that need to be in place in order to support our teachers, teaching computer science ed. We're also looking at the finance piece, as well as kind of the knowledge base and how we make sure that the computer science curricula that the teachers have access to is grounded in equitable teaching practices, as well as kind of the most recent computer science topics, cybersecurity, data science, et cetera. So thinking about these three pieces is also important in considering how we build capacity among our teachers. We mentioned earlier in our pop quiz that Minnesota does not currently have a specific computer science teaching license. It's a little bit of a complex issue though, because there are several licenses that have authorization to teach computer science related courses. So at the high school level, we have technology, math, business license. We also have kind of CTE licensure. So thinking about like business, communication, and tech careers, keyboarding is kind of in there as well. And then at the elementary level, we've got kind of elementary educators are definitely able to implement computer science, as well as some of the computer keyboarding and related technology endorsements, and then a library media specialist. Now, this is considering computer science specific courses. So maybe it's like one of those at the high school level advanced placement exams or related course. But something important to know and something that's unique in Minnesota is that our Minnesota Department of Education is working to embed computer science and computational thinking across each content area's standards, so that any teacher, no matter what their teaching license is, can incorporate computer science and computational thinking into their content area. So that's an added layer that is, in my opinion, very unique to Minnesota. But something that we definitely want to do is we want to have some ways that we're preparing teachers then to feel comfortable and confident to teach computer science. And so there are some really great organizations, and speaking from a biased perspective, Code Savvy's on this list too. But here are some organizations that are doing really important work preparing our current teachers for teaching computer science in the classroom. So just a shout out to some folks doing some really important work. So thinking about access, we already know that we are struggling, or have a lot of growth to explore in how to provide more access to computer science. I just want to point out that regionally, this is an important point as well, because we have more computer science courses offered, and this is at the high school level, because that's one of the data points we have most access to. So we have a pretty good concentration of computer science courses offered in the metro area here, but as you see in greater Minnesota, it's definitely an equity issue. We need to make sure we have support for providing access to computer science in greater Minnesota regions as well. Thinking about participation, who is participating if courses are offered, we definitely see some persistent gaps and areas for growth here, both in terms of gender as well as race and ethnicity. So again, thinking about things kind of from the perspective of where are we seeing consistent gaps or consistent areas of growth in industry, and how are those reflected in education? Here's an area that definitely could use growth, I think, in both industry and education. And the last piece I want to share is just about experience. So this is, again, how do students feel? How are they doing? What's their success level once they're taking these computer science courses? I mentioned that high school data is right now our easiest to access data points, specifically around that advanced placement exam. So when we think about like, what's the success level of students taking those advanced placement exams at the high school level? If you look at the top left graphic, Minnesota looks like we're doing pretty good. We're above the national average for both of the advanced placement computer science exams, and that's absolutely true. And there's also more to the story. So when we look at the data in a little more of an intersectional way, we see that actually for Black male exam takers, Black female exam takers, we're only at about a 44% pass rate, which definitely does not match what we'd like to see. And then for our Hispanic or Latinx exam takers, again, there's definitely important ways that we need to be supporting our students there. So that's a little bit about the Minnesota data. And I'm going to pass it back to Amy and Katie as well to share a little bit about where policy is at in Minnesota.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So after hearing the context, it might feel a little overwhelming from a K-12 perspective, but it is most assuredly not the case. As Representative Davney, who is currently authoring some legislation in the Minnesota House, said at the Education Policy Committee hearing last week, we can catch up, and we can. House File 32 and 3243 and Senate File 3578, Senator Curran. They are identical bills. They will establish a computer science task force through the Department of Education to develop a foundational blueprint for a statewide CS program for elementary and secondary schools. So this is this legislation is basically think of it as the first but essential step to helping us build out that blueprint, the foundation that we need to build out our K-12 CS programming. The task force, it has a number of tasks that it must accomplish: describing objectives and goals of a CS program, developing comprehensive and foundational voluntary K-12 CS academic standards, professional development opportunities for teachers, a plan for addressing teacher licensure, whether that be endorsement and teacher preparation programs, and a plan for expanding CS opportunities for every school within 5 years. The turnaround timeline on this is pretty quick. If this legislation were to pass, the department would be tasked with identifying the task force members by June, and the task force is tasked with developing these plans by the end of January 2023 in time for the next legislative session. So that is very fast. That said, there are a number of states and a number of tools available to help that task force move forward. 22 states currently have a state plan for computer science, with 8 more in progress. And Code.org, along with a number of other organizations, have developed a state planning toolkit that is available to the department and the task force to help with this responsibility. I'm happy to report I just learned that the House file is going to be scheduled for a hearing in the Education Finance Committee next week. It has been heard in Education Policy and passed and referred to the Education Finance Committee. There is a little bit of funding available for the department to put together the task force and administer these responsibilities. And so it will be in the Education Finance Committee next week. And it was introduced in the Senate at the end of last week. So there has not been any movement on the Senate side quite yet.
Thanks so much, Amy. That's exciting news, and exciting to see Minnesota on the policy map. So we're looking forward to updates there. Katie, we're coming up on our time, but I would love to hear, you had a couple of examples of some ideas for industry and education to partner. And while Katie's sharing, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, and we can take a couple of those as well at the end here.
Yeah, sorry. So in the 2 minutes that we have remaining, and please feel free to add things in the chat, but MNTEC is this year, especially as part of our legislative priorities and a part of our overall strategy, is trying to really make sure that we can engage and help move the needle on expanding pathways into computer science and tech related programs. So as part of our legislative priorities, we are in support of this legislation. Jeff Tollefson, our CEO, actually spoke at the hearing, or testified at the hearing. And, you know, one of the things that I think we've seen across the country is that employers really need to be engaged in order to make sure that education understands what the skills and competencies are that are in demand, but then also helping industry associations like MNTEC can kind of play a helping role in being that translator or connector between education and industry, because so often it's really hard for employers to know where to connect. So I would just say, as a kind of a call to action, if you are an employer on this call and you're interested in getting engaged, please get in touch with us at MNTEC. We are very excited to be more engaged in the CS4All initiative, and then also just looking at more ways to expand out pathways and partnerships. And that's the same with education providers too. Please, we are kind of at the initial step of making sure that we understand what our employer needs are and what they really are looking for in tech talent. And then we want to use that to help inform the work that you're all doing and making sure that you know, there's alignment between the skills and competencies that are in need. So here's a couple of other ways to get involved. You can obviously reach out to your legislators at advocacy.code or advocacy.code.org. Get involved with us. The other thing that we wanted to mention is please be reaching out to your senators, your House members, if you are in support of the bill that Amy was mentioning for this foundational blueprint. There's also community-based organizations that'll be session 3, and there's CS Journeys at code.org, and that's also something that we'll be hopefully working with code.org to help our employers kind of provide more experiential learning opportunities for students.